How many cities can say they have an epic castle, a Da Vinci on display, a former Pope's residence, an enormous town square, bustling night markets, and is also cheap to visit? Well, Krakow ticks all of these boxes, and we're still just getting started. How about an arcade museum? Or a tethered hot air balloon that you can go up in just for the view? Add in incredible sunsets, a fun nightlife, and Krakow is simply a must-visit city if you are travelling through Poland. I spent 3 days here at the end of my Poland road trip, and it was simply not enough to experience all that the city has to offer. Part of the challenge is making time for the many day trips available just outside the city. This includes Auschwitz, which is a heavy but important pilgrimage to make. But we'll come back to that later and kick things off in the heart of the city. Krakow is a big city, but it's still possible to explore entirely on foot. Most of the tourist action will be in the Old Town, in and around the Wawel Castle and the Market Square. Now, every Polish city that I've visited has their own town square, which serves as a unique fingerprint that characterises the city. But Krakow can boast that it has the biggest. The dimensions are roughly 200 metres on each side, and it's a hive of activity in every corner, even underground. In the centre is the Town Hall Tower and Cloth Hall, where you'll find plenty of souvenir vendors if that's your thing. St Mary's Basilica stands out in the corner, which I assume is far more impressive once the scaffolding is removed. And don't forget the Rheineck Underground, which is a museum right underneath the square that tells the story of Krakow. The surrounding buildings are much less colourful than I've seen in other town squares, but it makes up for it with the energy of the place, which is incredible both day and night. There are restaurants and bars all around, just as you'd expect. But at night time, there are also food markets, and they're a lot of fun to explore. You can grab a beer and try out all the local specialties, including lots of different types of sausage. Just be careful of the guys trying to get you into a strip club. There are a lot of stories of bad things happening to tourists in these venues, but they're easily avoided. Branching out from the town square, and you'll find plenty of cobbled streets to explore, and it's a great place to get lost in during the day. It's only a short walk to Saints Peter and Paul's Church, along a street that is a bustling shopping hub, again with lots of restaurants and cool places to check out. Sticking with the buildings of religious significance, a few blocks away you'll also find the Bishop's Palace and the former residence of Pope John Paul. You'll also find what remains of the old city walls around the perimeter of the Old Town, with some nice parkland just on the outside that flanks this part of the city. We'll come back to the Old Town a little later, but for now, we're heading south of this area into the Old Jewish Quarter, a former ghetto in World War II that has gone from an abandoned neighbourhood with a sad past to a buzzing, trendy area all just within the last few decades. This part of the city has a completely different feel to it. It's rustic and even run down in some sections. You'll find street art, synagogues, museums, and lots of cool bars with live music and plenty of great places to eat. Make sure you stop by an old bar called Nowy for dinner and a cocktail. It's a former synagogue turned bar and community centre that looks every bit of its 130-year age. It's an interesting place to hang out, and the desserts, they're pretty good. You'll also find plenty of more modern venues in the area too. It would probably take a couple of days if you wanted to explore every area of Wawel Royal Castle. It is huge. There are 9 different ticketed areas, and it can be a significant investment of both time and money. I chose to see one section of the castle itself, plus the Sandomierska Tower and the Dragon's Den, and was happy enough just with that. The tower and the den were both smaller and could be covered in around an hour or so. There were some nice views from the tower, but I found the inside pretty uneventful, and the top level not quite high enough to see over the old town and back over the full castle area. With how busy it is outside, I was expecting it to be packed in here, but by the third level, not a soul. I guess they don't like stairs. The Dragon's Den is a natural cave and was surprisingly big. The main use of these caves was a reservoir to supply the castle with fresh water all those years ago. But getting inside the main castle was a bit more of a grand experience, and I recommend you see at least one of the sections. Even the courtyard prior to the entry was so big that it's worth a visit even if you're not going inside. So I'm glad I got here early because there's almost no one standing here in the courtyard, and standing here in the relative quiet and spaciousness, the scale of it is pretty unbelievable. And I have a feeling that already this is going to be my favourite place in the entire castle. The audio guide that came with my ticket was very helpful because there was limited signage throughout the museum, especially in the rooms that were still laid out in a state for practical use to explain what the hell they were. My favourite section actually turned out to be where all of the Renaissance artworks were. Not very Polish, very Italian. But there are also rooms dedicated to Polish statues, tapestries, and ceramics. Overall, I think I enjoyed walking around the grounds of the castle more than any of the internal sections. So it really just depends what you're into. Make sure you purchase the tickets for the sections you'd like to see in advance, because in the busier months, they do fill up. I'll put some links in the description so you can get yourself organised ahead of time. And don't forget to also check out Wawel Cathedral, which is in the same complex just past the big main entrance. Now, one thing that Krakow has plenty of is world-class museums, and my biggest highlight of the visit was coming up next. When I first walked into the room that houses the painting, I was the only one in there for about 90 seconds. Being in that dark room on my own was both unexpected and a surreal moment where things just seem to move in slow motion. It usually looks like this. Not a Mona Lisa crowd by any stretch, but still a busy corner of the museum. We're back in the Old Town and inside the National Museum of Krakow, which houses a famous Leonardo da Vinci painting, The Lady of Ermine. I assume that's the Ermine. I don't know what it is. The museum also has an extensive collection of paintings, artifacts, and armory. The Egyptian section was a particular highlight. I don't know what the plural of sarcophagus is, but those and the tablets that are thousands of years old always fascinate me. But there is no doubting what the feature attraction is here. Those few initial moments that I had all alone in that dark room will be etched in my memory forever. Heading further outside the city limits is a nice little spot called Krakus Mound. I stumbled across this almost by accident while I was making my way back to the city from the Arcade Museum, which I'll discuss shortly. On arrival, I found hundreds of people who had the same idea as me. The area was mostly an open field that sat in an elevated position that's just high enough to have a clear view across the Krakow skyline. At the back of this was a more pronounced hill with a cluster of people perched on top where you get an amazing 360-degree view. And the sunset that day was simply incredible. And of course, that hot air balloon dangled up there in the air way off in the distance. It's worth mentioning one activity that I didn't get to do, which was the Oskar Schindler factory tour of Schindler's List fame. The movie was shot in the Jewish quarter that we mentioned earlier and has become a very popular attraction in the city. So you'll need to book well in advance for this, and unfortunately, I missed out on that one. I've put a link in the description so you can get yourself organised. I have also referenced the hot air balloon a few times throughout this video. This is a tethered balloon that takes people up into the sky for a beautiful viewpoint of the city. You'll be close to the castle and you'll get a much better view than the Krakus Mound because it's much closer to the old town. Tickets will cost anywhere from $20 to $40, and there's also a whole carnival area surrounding it if that's your thing. Something a little more out of left field was the arcade museum. This is a nice break from the more touristy areas if you're looking for something just a little different and nostalgic. It was a good chance to indulge my inner child and play all those old video games I grew up on. I headed straight for the original Simpsons arcade game, but all the old favourites were there, like Street Fighter 2, NBA Jam, Time Crisis, Terminator 2, Donkey Kong, Frogger, you get the idea. They even had the old Jurassic Park game. Anyway, despite all of that, I got bored after about 45 minutes and was ready to hit the road, but it still was a nice fun trip down memory lane. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many great day trips from Krakow that you'll have a hard time fitting them all in. The most popular would be a trip to Auschwitz. Now, this is an infamous location for very sad reasons, so it's not something I'm going to talk about here or share any of the footage. But jump on a guided tour and experience the day for yourself. Chances are you'll come out the other side with a very different perspective on human nature than when you went in. Some of the Auschwitz tours are coupled with a visit to the Wiśnicz salt mine. Now, this is not the only salt mine that you can visit, and because I still had the car for one more day from my Polish road trip, I decided to go in another direction and visit the Bochnia salt mine, which I was to learn was only really visited by locals. The tour groups will be much smaller generally, and the mine far less busy. However, English-speaking tours are infrequent, and I had to pay for a private tour because I was the only one there. So it cost me much more than I expected, but hey, I was one-on-one with a tour guide and got to learn a whole lot. Nevertheless, you can probably skip the salt mine because there's so many other cool things to do around Krakow. But something I do want to share was what I found in this underground complex that was built into the mine, complete with a dance floor for underground parties, bunk beds where you can sleep about 60 people, a restaurant, some basic sporting facilities, and the longest slide that I have ever seen. Apparently, this thing goes all the way up from the surface down into the depths of the mine. It was decommissioned due to the frequent injuries that people would get riding it, but after complaints from the locals, many of which had been playing on this thing since they were kids, it is now going to be partially rebuilt. So it should be a bit safer in the future when it's not hundreds of meters long, and once this is finished, it would be an incredible thing to come and do. So maybe wait for that before you visit the Bochnia salt mine. And while you're out there, you can also stop by the Nowy Wiśnicz castle, which is nearby and a worthwhile stop. It is much more modest compared to the Wawel castle back in the city, but it certainly has some Rapunzel vibes with the towers in each corner of the castle itself. I'll include links to all of these day trips in the description so you can check them out. So while we've covered a lot of ground, there is still so much to discover around the old town of Krakow and the surrounding districts. It's a diverse city with many layers, and you'll have an incredible time exploring what it has to offer.